Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on the false dichotomy between developer velocity and security. We're just going to give everybody else a couple more minutes to join here, and then we'll get started. So just bear with me, 2 more minutes, and then we'll begin. All right, it's 12:02 Eastern Time, so let's get this started. David and Avi, I'll have you turn your cameras off. So, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on the false dichotomy between developer velocity and security. We're joined by two folks at really the top of the field, David and Avi. But before we get started, I wanted to cover a couple housekeeping items. So first, this meeting will be recorded, and we'll make sure to send it out once it's done. So don't worry if you need to step out for a moment. And two, we want to make this an interactive panel discussion. So make sure to ask any questions that you have in the chat box, and we'll try to get those answered for you live so you can participate in the discussion. So without further ado, let's get started. I'm Charlie Klein. I do product marketing for JIT. Be moderating the session, and I'm joined by David and Avi. So I'll let them introduce themselves. David, do you want to go first?
Sure. Thank you, Charlie. So I'm David Melamed, one of the co-founders in the citywide JIT. I have a long career into the cybersecurity fields, about like more than a decade, but everything started a long time ago. Back in France, I was born in France, and I have a PhD actually in bioinformatics. So it started like in very different fields. And then I got into like more the engineering stuff, working for a couple of companies like MyHeritage in Israel. And then I jumped into the cybersecurity fields, working notably for CloudLock, in the CASB space that was then acquired by Cisco. And then I worked there for a couple of years until I joined and I decided to create JIT. I have a very wide engineering background and very much into security for quite some time. Very much also into communities like Python and AWS and OWASP. So that's why it's a pleasure to talk with you, Avi.
Sure. My name is Avi Douglen. I'm the founder and CEO of Bounce Security. We're a small boutique consultancy focused on product security. I'm also very involved with OWASP as well. I'm on the chair of the global board of directors. I also have a long history with security, but even longer with insecurity. My background was started as a software programmer, and like many of us back in the day, built insecure software. And I started noticing that stuff, and I noticed a lot of these issues in my code and my colleagues' code, and started fixing them and realizing the problems actually are deeper than that and systemic. And slowly from there, I kind of started tilting over to, well, programming security systems And from there, well, let's talk about secure systems as well.
Cool. Thanks, Avi and David, for joining us today. So I'll get us started here with just a real basic question just to kind of frame the conversation. Avi, I'll have you go first here, and then David, you can respond. So how do you view the current state of application security? It's a fast-moving field, but it's also kind of been around for a while. Feel like folks have been saying the same thing for a while. So what do you feel is new and different in the world of application security today, and how do you view the current state of things?
I'll start with the last part of, what is new and different. And to that, I'm going to respond with everything old is new again. Yes, there's a lot of new technology, there's lot of new methodologies, a lot of new frameworks, and we keep rediscovering all the same stuff all over again. The OWASP Top 10 has had SQL injection as the #1 or #3 vulnerability since the first version. Was it 20 years ago almost, right? Whatever the first one was. And it's changed, it's mutated, and today it still exists. SQL injection and the other forms of injection, for example, still exist even in the newest stuff. We talk about AI, and there's the OS LLM Top 10 as well. And one of the most prominent things there is prompt injection, which is basically the same thing as SQL injection, just a different kind of engine, right? So how is that? How is that we still have those same things? And I think there's the underlying issue of we haven't really socialized this concept of secure software, software security, to where it really matters. And that's the developers building the software, right? And so SQL injection today is a solved problem on any specific instance of a SQL injection. What is not solved is building mass amounts of millions of lines of code of software and not having SQL injection at a framework scale, at an architectural scale, of dealing with all this legacy code that have 2,000 critical issues of SQL injection. That is not a solved problem because that's not a technical problem, that's a social problem. And that is, I think, our next big challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I actually feel exactly the same. As you said, if you're comparing like the OWASP Top 10 from last year, like last 2 years, and from the day it was created, like it's the same list of issues, like in the different order maybe, but these are actually the same. I think that also the problem comes from the root, and the root is that if you're thinking about like development courses, you won't see security there. Like it's usually not part of how people are learning how to code. It's more about like the syntax, it's more about like the grammar, the language themselves, like loop and conditions and stuff like that, like more the technicity about it, but not really about security. And one of the reasons for that is that developers are not measured by how secure the code is. They're mostly measured about like their velocity, like how fast they can build and deploy new features to the cloud and to the market. And so I think that's one of the root issues, is that like unfortunately the awareness of security in the developer world is not that big, and that's why you still see those like same SQL injections for like a decade already.
I actually disagree with you about that, David. I agree with everything you just said, except for one thing. That is not the root. The root issue here is that nobody pays for security. Nobody wants to pay extra for the more secure software, but they do pay less for insecure software. So if people would be buying security, then yeah, you know what? That would probably economically translate back to the top of that pipeline that you described. And you're 100% correct about that. But because companies don't pay extra for the more secure version, right? The issue is that if your software is less secure, then you're going to have a hard time selling to those companies or consumers, and you're going to have a hard time upgrading people and things like that. So you don't pay extra for a car just because it has seatbelts. But if the car doesn't have seatbelts and the brakes don't work, you might not buy that car.
It's true, but actually, I would argue that companies are paying for security, just paying for security products instead of like paying the developers to code in a more secure way. Yeah, totally agree on that.
So we're buying products, security products for developers, but are they really being used and adopted on a day-to-day basis? Like why is the adoption problem so persistent after having a similar conversation for, a decade now of trying to enable developer adoption of these security products that can help them build more secure code?
Because as David said, that's not their priority. That's not what they're getting judged on. So why should they take time out of their day? Why should they stop what they're doing, flip over to this third-party portal to check out how my security is doing? That's not one of their priorities. That's not one of their OKRs. So why should they do that? It gets in their way. It doesn't feel natural to them. They need to start taking time to do with that, and it's not their normal stuff that they use and live with. There's friction involved, and there's no benefit for that. They're not going to get their bonus based on not having security vulnerabilities, because how do you even measure that?
Yeah, I would say like even more than that. Like most of the security products that I know are built for security teams and not really for developers. Like sure, there are some tools like mainly in the open source world that are more dev friendly, but most of them are not because they're not really targeting developers. So and still, and you could argue whether they're really dev friendly or not, but at least they're trying. Like most of the security products in the cyber security industry is mainly targeting security teams because they are the ones who are paying. And so I think that that's one of the reasons there's some they're so resisting. The other that usually they believe that security is kind of impacting the velocity, and so it's a distraction for them. Like everything that I need to add, like any gate that I will add that will prevent me to deploy my code, like it is as a result, I will be able to deploy less code to production or less frequently. So I think that these are also like one of the main reasons why they're resisting.
And you're absolutely right. A lot of these tools are security tools. At best case scenario, they're dev friendly. And by the way, we're talking about the AppSec tools, not
Yes.
all this. Even if we narrow that down to, let's talk about static analysis. That is the most developer thing that you can get. And yet, best case scenario, some of them, not even all of them, are dev friendly. And still, it's a dev-friendly security tool. And like you said, that's arguable, but that's not a developer tool. There's still a difference. There's friction. You're slowing you down. You're not hitting your OKRs or KPIs, whatever you want to call it. You're not producing software. You're not getting your bonus, right? And it goes from the lowest, the first level programmer, all the way up to the VP R&D, who also gets judged on the team velocity and not on, well, how secure are you? The other part of that, by the way, we can't measure how secure software is. We can measure how insecure it is. Those incentives are not aligned.
That's definitely true. I think that on top of it, even like with the most dev-friendly tools, the output of those tools are not really speaking the engineering language. Like, for example, there are some SQL injections somewhere. You have no idea what's the impact on your product. Like, and so why would you fix it? You have no idea if it's important or not. Like most of the tools, even they are super smart, they don't have any business context. So they have no idea like whether this is something that is critical for you to fix or if it's just like another thing that is here, but like no one cares about.
You said two little words there that are super important, because usually the tools talk about, is this critical to fix? But you dropped in there, is this critical for you? And none of the tools actually pay attention to that for the obvious reason the tools are generic and they have no business context about what you are doing in your day job.
Exactly.
So what are we going to do here, guys? It seems like all of the strategies to try to enable developers to build more secure code haven't been working. You say they're dev friendly at best. So how do we make this a developer thing, right? The title of the webinar is the false dichotomy between developer velocity and security. So why is that hopefully a false dichotomy, right? What's the path here?
I'll start from my side because this is where I think David and I will start deferring here. It's not about the tools. Tools can be helpful. Tools are not going to solve that issue. For the exact same reason, the last thing that I said, the tools are by definition going to be generic. Now, they may support automation. They may help you do what you're doing. Best case scenario, the tools are an automated way to support your manual process because let's face it, developing software today is manual process. Again, you're going to automate a lot of it away, but you still have to have somebody sit down and write out the code. You're going to have to have somebody sit down or stand up at a whiteboard and decide what code is being built, right? You still need to do that. Tools might be able to help you with that, but they're not going to solve that for you. If you're trying to scan your way into security, that's just going to slow you down and you're going to cause friction and not be substantially more secure. All the problems that we just talked about. But the way to do that is to integrate security thinking into your development workflows. And you can only do that as a developer, not as a security professional.
So I think that, yeah, definitely thinking about security is great. But I still believe that tools have an important role to play here. I just believe that in order for this to work correctly, you need like a very good dev experience. And dev experience is not only dev friendly. What I mean by dev experience is that you need all those tools to be really integrated in the way you're building your software. Like, you know, you have a lot of rituals, like agile rituals. You need to think about like security in those rituals and have like those tools and the output of those tools and like the way you measure whether or not you're successful at implementing those tools as part of your rituals. For example, if you can think about your security issues that were created during the sprint during the retrospective, if you can think of what are the most important things to fix as part of your planning. Thinking security is not only like thinking like in terms of threat modeling at the beginning when you're creating a new feature. It's also like really being part of the DNA of how you build your product, and thinking that security is just like code qualities should be part of it, and every security issue should actually be considered just like another bug. And that's how you can really make it part of your day-to-day life, basically.
I agree with that 100%. Tools are important, but they're not the focus. Was my point. Automation, everything we can automate should be automated. Low-hanging fruit should be scanned, maybe even on the PR, even before that. Have the ID scan that, block that out. Have it scan on every PR and every merge. Sure, absolutely, we want to be doing that, but that's only going to handle the generic low-hanging fruit. We want to talk about things like business logic issues and context-specific stuff. That is going to require that thinking. And by the way, you mentioned threat modeling. I'm a huge fan of that. I think that actually helps a lot, but it doesn't need to just be upfront before you start building a design. Good threat modeling goes down to the level of each user's story. What are we doing there? And I do a lot of threat modeling. I work with a lot of teams doing threat modeling, teaching developers to do threat modeling as part of their day-to-day workflow. And you can have really, really lightweight threat modeling without getting into, all the diagrams and DFDs and Stride and Pasta and whatnot. It can even be a simple question of what do we expect to happen in this user story? What can go wrong? Just a little bit of security thinking around that. And it literally can take 2 minutes. And that has massive impact. 2 minutes on each user story will have massive impact because now you're paying attention to implement the right things and to not implement the wrong things. And sometimes it's intuitive. You just need to have that space and that focus to think about that.
Yeah, definitely. I think just we come back to threat modeling and specifically whether or not we can automate it using things like Gen AI when we'll talk about that. But I think there is also another thing that is really key to developer adoption is the fact that at the end there's some kind of shared responsibility between the security team and the developer team. Until now, in many companies, security is responsible for product security. Security team is responsible for that, and engineers are just like receiving all those tools into the environment and are not part of the picture. I think that if you can create this shared responsibility as part of this proactive security culture everyone is talking about, then you can really change like how security is considered in the company, and that should start. And this is what we believe, at least at JIT, that should start with some virtual contract between the security team and the developer team that is called like the security plan. At the end, if you don't know what is the business objective that you're trying to reach, it's really hard to do security because like you don't have a shared goal and it's not transparent to the company. Usually those security plans are living in spreadsheets or in the head of the CISO or the CTO, and it's really far away from the engineering organization to understand exactly what we're trying to achieve. By having this plan like front and center and kind of like agreeing on that's the common goal that we both security team and engineering team are trying to reach, I think that it's the right beginning to have some good collaboration between them instead of the friction that you currently can witness in many companies.
Sounds like you're talking about threat modeling again. When doing threat modeling right, you're applying the difference about the business objectives and applying that logical context information on the technical systems and understanding where that matters, right? Threat modeling isn't just, oh, there could be an SQL injection over there, cross-site scripting over there. That's not good, interesting threat modeling. It's important, but the more interesting, powerful, valuable stuff is when you find out, oh, this doesn't actually work with what we're trying to achieve here. As Simon Sinek says, start with why, and that helps you drive that. One of the techniques that I teach for threat modeling, we actually use this really powerfully, especially with product managers, is I call this value chain threat modeling or value-driven threat modeling. And that's focusing on the value chain of that feature that you're trying to produce. Why are we even writing this feature? Well, why is this important? What is the business objective? What's the value we're getting out of it? And then you can build that chain of, well, how does this feature actually do that? How is that actually supposed to work to meet that objective? And then you could put guardrails up on that. You put guardrails up on that value chain or value stream, as some DevOps or product management folks call it. Basically the same thing with a different structure. And that's another form of threat modeling that's very, very lightweight and very, very powerful. This doesn't take 2 minutes. This takes maybe 10 minutes, right, for a feature. And that gives you a lot of value. And now you might not have the entire, Excel sheet with 3,000 possible threats that you might find if you have, a real expert come in and do that. But now you're being aligned to what the business needs from security. And you found the most important issues and you protected them.
Yeah, I think you're right. Those security plans are derived from threat modeling and definitely linked to it. And I'm like, we're already talking about that so much. I'm kind of curious whether or not you believe that as everything in security, and since we're talking with engineers, this can be automated too.
I don't think everything could be automated. And listen, there's a lot of really cool threat modeling platforms nowadays. Some older commercial. There's Threat Dragon, which helps for a little bit of it. There's a bunch of cool startups in the space. But the best they can do is automate part of it. Automate maybe the diagrams, automate the low-hanging generation of stuff. Definitely automate the management and what happens later. But real threat modeling is just brainstorming. You get a bunch of people in the room, sit around a table, and talk about what security means for us, what that actually applies. If you do that, you get huge return on the amount of time you spend just thinking about those things using a structure framework and however you want. And you could do this as lightweight or heavyweight as you want. And that gives you massive return going forward. You spend a little bit of time up front on the feature or the user story, and that helps you build more secure software down the line. So when we do our scans and our pen tests and all that stuff, we don't waste time on that because we already focused on what really matters to us. Sure, you'll find some technical issues, right? I don't know, HTTP responses are leaking server headers. I always see that still in every pen test ever. But that doesn't really matter. That's not important to us.
Yeah, I also believe that you cannot really automate 100% like threat modeling, because as if you want to like bring automatically like business context to all the vulnerabilities that the scanners are generating, I think you'll be limited at some point, because there's just a couple of things that you cannot like figure out by yourself automatically. Like, for example, whether or not your database is processing PII data that is like critical customer data, things that only like the customers can know. And that you cannot like just auto discover. And so like as everything, I think maybe we can have like 70% automated, and then you will need like the human touch. And that's great, because you will still need like the AppSec engineers and those security practitioners that we see every day. Like we still need them. Like not everything can be automated in that part.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. You could probably automate around 70%, and then the other 70% you do manually. My math is not off here, by the way.
So
That's
I want
the way it
to
works.
So I want to push you guys in a couple things here. David, you mentioned the shared responsibility between product security, application security teams, and developers earlier. Avi mentioned getting developers to change their frame of thinking and to actually incorporate practices like threat modeling into their day-to-day. But earlier in the conversation, you both mentioned how hard it is to get developers to change their way of doing things. And so we're talking about these great ideas, but earlier, even both of you said, look, this is really hard to do. So when you guys are trying to help software engineering teams become more secure in their day-to-day routines, how are you actually moving the culture of these teams to drive like real, repeatable, systemic change rather than just being another nuisance tack on to the SDLC?
You said a magic word there, right? Culture transformation. That's the magic word, right? And you're right. It's hard to change culture, partly because nobody can actually define what a corporate culture actually is. You just know it when it's good, or you know it when it's bad, best case. And part of that is that I think, and this is safe space, right? I can go off on a rant now. Security people need to get out of our own way, right? We're trying to force, and I've been there myself for many years. Keep trying to force developers to work the way we think they should work, instead of helping them do whatever they're doing better. We're talking about threat modeling as an example. I've gotten a few months ago, this is a historical story, doing a training, and we have a room full of developers and architects, a bunch of security people on the side. It's mostly developers and architects, and the senior architect of this multi-billion-dollar company is sitting there in the corner, and he's like, why are we even bothering this? This should be the security people's team job to do this threat modeling. Okay, fine. So whatever the security manager explains, I start talking about threat modeling and talking about modeling and the architecture and the diagram. And the senior architect, the chief architect, is getting really upset. It's like, why are you wasting our time? My architects and product managers are doing this anyway. And all the architects and product managers are like looking at each other, like, no, we don't. Should we be doing that? And he's like, wait, seriously? And from that moment, he was bought in. He was the biggest fanboy of threat modeling, because this is not about getting developers to be security experts. It's about getting developers to be better developers. Stuff they should be doing and thinking about anyway. And you know what? We find a lot of stuff that has nothing to do with security simply by getting them all to think about this, right? Especially now, think about cloud services. We touch on how much these services are actually costing, because no developer, usually most developers, don't think about the cost efficiencies that you could have, or how much this service is going to be costing at scale and things like that. But we have to think about that from a security architecture perspective. So that's just one example of not just finding security issues, but having the security modeling discussion actually helps for functional issues and business related issues. So this was one example, and I'm using threat modeling because it's such a powerful example of that kind of trade-off there between, yes, it's security stuff, but we just want you to be a better developer, do what you do best, do it better. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
It does. It reminds me of what David was saying earlier about aligning security with code quality, making security feel like you're fixing bugs.
I think that like changing a culture in a company is not something that is easy. And that's why when you see like those shared responsibility, it's usually in a lot of progressive companies that already understood that any other ways like are not working. And the only way to make security work, especially at scale, is by having this mentality shift. Now, how do you change like the mind, like the mentality? I think you need to start small. For example, instead of having to deal with like a huge backlog, an endless list of issues, if in a company you can start by just dealing with a few issues and then like gradually think about the fact that security is not your enemy, it's not something that is trying to slow you down, then you can have like something different. If you start talking about security as something positive, like everyone wants to, like all the good developers want to have like good quality in their code. No one wants to deploy code that has bugs. The same way, like no one wants to deploy code with security issues. And so if you can like have this other way of seeing security, not as something that will slow you down, but if you have like a platform that will give you like the information just in time in order for you to fix it while you're working on it, and not something that is like an afterthought that you need to completely shift your work right now and work on something that is not in your scope of work at the moment, just because you have a security issue that the security team is sending to you, then I think things can start to shift slowly. But I don't think it's something small, so it needs to be a buy-in of the whole organization. It's not something that just one developer can think differently. It's a buy-in, and it needs to come from the top.
I agree with the last part, what you said. Starting small, to my mind, doesn't actually work for culture transformation unless you either have a lot of patience or a unicorn personality. If you're in a massive organization, starting small will take years to start having real impact. If you're at a small company or a startup, it's going to get lost and it's going to get dropped by the wayside. I think you need to start big. Buy that buy-in at the top and buy in from the operational side. One of the most powerful ways to change that in my mind is actually from the product management side. If you set this as the business objective, as the goal, as the functional, this is now part of what you need to build. That will slowly trickle down. It will take a while. You always need to have patience with transformation or anything culture, really. But this is starting big. We're going big. Again, start with why. Why are we doing this? Why is this important? Making that grand, big statement. But then you still need to work small, think big, work small. And then you need to align everything according to that. And that takes time to shift workflows, to shift changes, to shift the way of thinking. But culture is notoriously hard to even define what it is. I think for our perspective, that the best definition I heard for security culture is what the developers do when the security team isn't looking, right?
Yeah.
Okay, to change that, you really need to drive that in, and it takes 2 to 3 years, and that's fast.
Yeah, when I'm thinking about like starting small, I was like mainly thinking about like starting with one team versus like disrupting your whole engineering organization, because like you still need to deliver at this point, so you cannot like change everything from like during the night, because you may have like a lot of impact. But starting with one team and like gradually upgrading your team, but thinking of security, maybe one way to do it without having to completely disrupt your whole production chain.
So the poster child for that would be Microsoft in 2001, right? The Trustworthy Computing Initiative shut down, everybody shut down for 6 months. But I agree with you. I wouldn't necessarily call that starting small, but I would say that is well scoped change.
Sure.
Go big for a specific scope of organization. I agree with that. And one other thing that would really help with that is not just the security team say, oh, we're going to change the organization, but you get people from the inside to be your strongest supporters, what we like to call security champions, right? And they can drive that within the developer team. And you know what? Security champions are not just developers. Let's call that out, right? You got security champions on the QA team, security champions on the product team, and if you have security champions everywhere, that is their personal white horse that they're riding on, and they're going to be driving that home and pushing that everywhere. That starts to filter out and kind of like spread out and grow that culture change.
Yeah, and actually, I think that if you don't have any security champion in your organization, you should start there, because that definitely the best advocates for that to happen.
But yeah, I agree with you, David, but it's really hard to start with the first champion before there's that great big statement of why. Before we have that buy-in, before we have that motivational aspect, then that one champion is going to be shouting in an empty room. So
Sure.
you have
Sure.
it has to be a part of this overall culture transformation.
Yeah, well, what I'm just saying is that if you don't have anyone that is security-minded, security aware in the first place, you will have like big challenges to change the whole organization. But yeah, if you have like even one or two people that are already like into it and that already all the time, like, having these okay into trying to figure out whether someone actually did something that is not very secure, and like giving him counsel about how to fix it, I think that you're a way better place in order to like having them as the core to do your mentality shift.
Mm-hmm. Yep, agree with that.
So there's some other topics I was hoping to get to. I'm loving this thread of the conversation. There's one stakeholder that I feel like I haven't heard as much as I thought, which is the development team lead. Right, they're the ones implementing all the changes throughout their own team. What kind of role do you think they have to play when we're talking about cultural change in an organization? And is that like, do you see them as like some of the more effective potential security champions?
David, you want to go first? There's a few different questions
Sure.
there that I'm trying to.
I think that these are key people in order to implement this shared responsibility. And for one reason is that at the end, the team lead and the team itself, they are the owners of the services. And so right now, like in many companies, they're owners of how you build your service, how you deploy your service, how you support your service, like everything but security. And so I believe that if they can also like take on this security parts of owning the service, like have really the full ownership of the service, then that's the best way to implement this shared responsibility, because they already are like owning every other aspect. And so I think that they're a key persona in how you want to implement this shared responsibility, and you need to lean on them in order to make it happen.
And I'm going to add on to that, right? The development lead or VP R&D, however you want to call it, they're masters of implementation, right? That is literally what they're there for, to take that product vision and implement it. If they're on board, and David said, they are absolutely a key persona here, but if they're on board, they will implement that security vision as well, right? Because that's what they're doing. If they're not on board, then ain't nothing you can do to mandate them to do it. Now, when it comes to that cultural transformation, I found that managers and can't dictate culture. They can't decide what the culture is. What they can do is implement it. They can model it by saying, okay, we're actually going to be taking time out of our workflow to actually focus on this, right? That this, I mean, does this matter for our dev velocity? It shouldn't, but it takes a while to get to that point because you need to build those workflows up. You need to build up those muscles. You need to get those champions working, kind of, playing those instruments steadily, and you build that up, and it takes a while to get flowing with that. And when you do that, then that culture has already been transformed, right? And then that engineering group can work with high velocity and security and getting all of that together. Part of that is saying, you know what, we need to take time out right now. We're going to take 2 weeks and train everybody. Don't need to be 6 months like Microsoft. So taking that 2 weeks, is that going to harm velocity? Of course it is at first, but that gets amortized over time, right? Those 2 weeks over the course of the year will help everybody work faster by the end of the year. So it does take time and investment, but afterwards, that has actually helped change that culture. Whether it's we're all going to stop for 2 weeks to do training, maybe we'll go to a conference, maybe we'll do 1 day a month or 2 hours every a month to go to an OWASP meetup, for example, and learn about what we need to know. So it's a small investment almost, but this pays off in multiples over time.
I think there's
We got
also
a
another
go ahead,
aspect
David.
about the teams that thinking about it, like teams like to compete one with another, and I think that if you can reflect or surface the posture of the services that they own, they definitely will want to improve it, just because you don't want to be like the bad people in the class. And so by just having this psychological effect, you can have this positive incentive to fix more and try to be even better than a neighbor. So I think that also, if you think about how software is built, it's built on a lot of services, but services at the end are owned by teams. And so I think that the team unit is actually the way to make security scale, because then you will see the security at the level of the service and not like this huge backlog that is not owned by anyone. So I think that also that's the best way. The ownership is really a key part here of how we can implement it.
The only thing I would add to that is to be careful to not do this in a shamey way. We're not going to name and shame the worst team, but rather positive reinforcement, right? This is my dad face coming on right now, right? You want to encourage the best and not shame the worst, but you also need to deal with the worst, right? But you do that quietly behind the scenes and say, what's up? Do your team need more training? Do you need more skills? Do you need more time? But then you reward the best. The downside to that is that some abnormal people like myself do not respond well to normative gamification. I know most people do, but for example, when Stack Overflow started overemphasizing the point system, I stopped responding. I don't respond well to that, but most people do, as long as it's positive reinforcement.
Yeah, I totally agree on the positive aspect. Actually, what's really interesting is that when you're looking at security products, they're really negative. Like they show you everything that's wrong. When you're looking at engineering products, it shows everything that you did well. So there's definitely something there. You definitely want to encourage an incentive instead of shaming people. Yeah.
That's another aspect of what I said. These are not developer tools. These are security tools for developers. Best case scenario, and there's that conceptual friction of it doesn't fit with the positive builder way as opposed to security. Everything is broken.
Cool. So we're getting close to the top of our time here. I did want to pivot the conversation a bit towards OWASP for a moment. We do have two folks who are incredibly involved in the OWASP community. I think when most people think of OWASP, they think of OWASP top 10, right? That's what The organization is probably best known for, maybe I'm wrong, but that's at least my impression. What are for the folks joining us, what are some other resources that OWASP offers that can, help benefit the developer community and, help make the world more secure?
Before we touch on that, I want to respond to the OS top 10 part. Um,
Sure.
First of all, OS top 10 is not a standard. I feel like you need to reiterate this all the time because both customers and programmers and security engineers and almost all the vendors have complied with the OS top 10. It's not a standard. It's not a checklist. It's an awareness document. That's it. It's basically, it's 101. Best shirt I ever saw was I got hacked by the OS top 11, right? And the top 100 and whatever. There's other taxonomies. It's not the top 10, you're done. It's basic awareness. It's table stakes. It's basic hygiene. If you get hacked by something on the top 10, you're probably almost negligent. I'll be careful of saying that word, but you're doing something wrong, right? Because it's the basics. It's not security and it's not a standard. I really wish vendors would stop having scan for the top 10, but I know all vendors need to do that because the customers are still asking for it. And I wish customers would stop asking for that, except the vendors all provide it. So again, chicken and egg situation. The other thing I would say, last week I was at RSA. I was at the OS booth at RSA, and I had three groups of people. Tons of people came, and there were the groups of people, oh, what is OWASP? Never heard of it. And then I had the group of people, oh, of course I know OWASP. Everybody knows OWASP. Does anybody here not know OWASP? I just talked to 20 people who don't. Okay. But the interesting group was the people who came up, oh, I love OWASP. I use the OWASP all the time. I knew exactly, this happened multiple people. I know exactly where they're going. The OWASP top 10, right? Oh, you have other stuff? So that's exactly your question leading into it. I'm sure David has some of his favorites. I'm going to mention a couple of mine. You got the ASVS, which is a standard. You got 3 levels of 100, I think it's like we're up to 260 or 290 specific actionable requirements, that you could take as a baseline for generic security requirements and apply this. You can use this responsively to a threat model, like I have some threats, how I solve them, here we go. Or just, well, I want to be level 2 ASVS, take that. There's the SAM, the Security Assurance Maturity Model, which is about the process. What do you do? And this is great for sustaining teams, for, again, the culture part, right? How do I do what I do? Forget the requirements. A few of my other favorite projects, there's the cheat sheets. Fantastic resource, specific targeted action items, maybe 10 items. What do I need to do when I'm implementing a Docker system, right? What do I need to do when I'm building a file upload module? You got 11 or 12 specific, actionable, targeted developer speak tasks there, right? That's what you do. What about you, David? Oh, Juice Shop. I love Juice Shop. It's a broken web app.
Yeah, I was about to talk about Juice Shop. I think it's great if you want mainly all the goats, like it's called the goats, all the application that are really focused on teaching you how, like, what's secure and what's insecure mostly, and how you can test your own tools on that are really great to better understand and like make it really concrete. How do you leverage like vulnerabilities and how do you exploit them? So like there's Juice Shop. There's also one for serverless. A friend of mine wrote. I also like very much the project DSOM, just because I think that security is a journey, and so this is a framework about maturity. How you're getting more mature into security. I really think that it's a great way to have like some guidelines of where do I start, how do I make some progress into my security journey. So for that, I think it's a great framework. But yeah, there's a lot of great resources, educational resources, tools also, like dependency check for dependencies. Like there's a lot of different tools that you can find in OWASP. But I think it's there's a lot you can find there, specifically if you're a newbie, but not only. And that's great about it. And also there's a Slack community where you can actually have like this, I think 30,000 people talking about OWASP security, like more than 30,000. Okay, maybe more than 30,000.
30,000 active monthly users. I know because we just had to deal with the bill lately. Slack, if you're listening, I think also deserves a CompTIA environment, but go on. But yeah, in total, there's a lot more than that.
So I think it's also a great resource if you want to discuss with us, but not only about security, application security, and more.
Just to be vendor neutral here, I'm going to mention Defect Dojo as well, which is pretty much a competitor for JIT, right?
Sort of, yeah. It's a very like we're way more than that. Like Defect
There's
Dojo
overlap.
yeah, it's vulnerability management, but like we're doing way more than just that.
Yeah, I mean, there's an overlap of competitive feature set there, but it's not complete, that's for sure. But like David said, there's a lot of great projects out there. Cyclone DX, of course, is
Right on
the
DX.
standard and format and set of tools to help you generate that for an SBOM, software bill of materials. Yeah, and honestly, I don't even know all the projects. I think there's something like 290 projects right now. 20 something are either flagship or production level, ready to go, use right now in your line of business. And hundreds of other projects that a lot of niche, some really amazing stuff out there. Some stuff just takes time. Yeah.
Avi, David, thank you so much for joining us today. We covered a ton of ground. Especially enjoyed our conversation about trying to drive cultural change in development organizations, but you got a lot of great tidbits about the OWASP community, about threat modeling, about automating tooling. This is a fantastic discussion. So thanks so much for joining. And this recording will be sent out to everyone after the fact. So have a great rest of your day and have a great rest of your week, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Thanks a lot.
Everyone. Bye-bye.